Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on the role of psychology in sport. I am Stephanie Dahan and I am the event and content manager for SACAP. We are being joined by Monique Laidlaw, who is a high-performance mental health coach, and she works with high-performance athletes in professional sporting codes. So I would like to invite Monique to join us on the screen right now.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Monique. So Monique, I think just to give everybody an idea of what it is that you do, would you mind telling us who you are and what it is that you do at the moment?
Yes, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm a high-performance mental coach. I've been working with athletes for around 8 years now. I had the exceptional privilege of joining the Sharks in 2015, predominantly actually in an administrative role and an academic role, but I was also involved in mental skills coaching, where I was able to work with the athletes in a one-on-one capacity as well as in group and team sessions. So I worked with the academy players, which were boys fresh out of high school, right up to the professional senior players. In the beginning, it was mostly academy and junior players. And as the years progressed, many of those players, of course, became senior players. And of course, the rapport and the relationship I had built with them right from the age of 18, they had obviously built such a great relationship with me that they stuck with me right up until senior level. Yeah, so since then, I left the Sharks actually last year and have joined SACAP as an educator, and that's been an exceptional journey. And since then, I've actually moved into the realm of high school sport. So I've been working with some of the big traditional boys schools in Durban, namely Westville Boys High and Glenwood High School, where I've been able to do a similar kind of situation where I've worked with some youngsters one-on-one and then lots of team sessions as well.
Lovely. And then Monique, I think just what I think is also to understand there is a certain, well, there are various study journeys or pathways to get to this point, right? And so one of the pathways that we do know is obviously doing your psychology undergrad, postgraduate and masters, and then going on to become a specialist or niching in sport. But would you mind sharing what your journey has been to get you to this point?
Well, absolutely. So, the tricky thing being in South Africa is that currently the HBCSA doesn't have a registration for sports psychology. So not many universities offer a stream in sports psychology specifically. Many institutions will offer a module or perhaps a short course. So there is a lot of digging you have to do to try and understand the mind of an athlete. And personally, my journey was just through experience. After getting my post-grad degree in psychology, being involved at the Sharks assisted me with diving into the mind of an athlete. And that just came purely through, I was just fortunate that I was exposed to that space, but that came purely with exposure to working with athletes and understanding the difference between, I suppose it's, a lot with psychology, it's getting a person from a place of discomfort or even disorder to a fully operational person, versus high performance. You're often dealing with people who are functional, but getting them to a space of high performance. And that's generally where the difference is. But a lot of the time I noticed that many of these athletes were coping or trying to cope in a space of discomfort and disorder and didn't even really know it. But just like, counseling isn't something that's purely for the crazy people or, depressed people. It's for everybody. it's part of the human nature. Everybody needs that little bit of help because everybody goes through some kind of struggle, no matter who you are. And that's something that I realized with all of these youngsters. They had pasts, they had traumas, they had childhood things that they had been through. They had self-esteem issues, even from coming from a place of being treated like gods at their high schools, which a lot of them were. They had so many insecurities, and this spoke into their performance on the field. So I had to try and dig into what was underlying, you know, a lot of these feelings that they were having. Constant feelings of rejection and disappointment when you're not picked for the team and you don't understand why, and working through that stuff. And because a lot of them were quite young, you know, they were just your normal everyday stuff, dealing with, you know, girlfriend issues or friend issues or bullying issues, you know, all of those things existed where there hadn't been help and assistance in that area. And because of the fact that a lot of the athletes I worked with were specifically male, there not only was this stigma around mental health in general, but around males seeking help and being open to being vulnerable. And this is something that a lot of them just didn't know that they had access to. And as soon as they were given an opportunity to have a safe space where they felt that they could be accepted and understood and supported and not judged, they flourished in that space. And I was quite blown away by how many of these young men just took on that opportunity with both hands.
Definitely. Thanks so much for sharing that, Monique. I think you've touched on the stigma that people experience, I think just in general, and then also, like you said, sportsmen and then males in general. And I think you also touched on, you know, just what they were experiencing. So how would you feel it helps athletes to incorporate positive psychology in your interactions with them?
Well, sheesh, this is a very critical space because, you know, there's negative feedback all the time. And, you know, the default human mind tends to move towards the negative. And I've noticed over time, a lot of these athletes tend to adopt negative self-talk. So with regards to events that have happened in their life, constant comparison. I mean, when you're in a team, you're always competing with another person in the same position. So there's always this case of, I need to be better than them, I need to be better than them. And then as you move up in the ranks, you're always fighting for that position. And we can tend that, well, they tend to get into this space of negative self-talk and constantly putting themselves down, whether it comes to their conditioning, whether it comes to their ball skills, their passing skills. I mean, a lot of my frame of reference is rugby, so you're going to hear a lot of references to that. And then even more particularly, if you are looking at the more individual sports, like I've dealt with some swimmers, I've dealt with some MMA fighters, where it's almost even more extreme because it's just you. And that comparison is even higher. So the pressure is a lot more. And it's trying to just help them understand that positive self-talk is absolutely critical. And it's not a case of, you know, just taking that negative thought and telling it to go away or ignoring it. You know, you have to be intentional about it. And a lot of these young athletes, they just allow their minds to move into default, and they don't take the time to notice, you know. So I would often give the boys, you know, homework and tell them, like, take note. What are you thinking of prior to a game? What thoughts are going through your head when you're on the field? What are you thinking? What are you telling yourself? And I tried to help them be mindful of these things, because if they're not taking note of what those thoughts are, those thoughts just run rampant and become neuro pathways that are just stuck there, and they just move into that way of thinking all the time. So they have to take notes. I would make them write down what these negative thoughts are and replace them with something positive, and replace them with the truth. And in some cases, that thought may be truth. You know what I mean? They could be at a high body fat percentage and they need to get it lower. So that could be reality. But it's telling yourself that you're capable. It's telling yourself you can, and it's being positive about the progress that you're making. So I would have to constantly help them see those things. And a lot of these things they don't even consider. So once they know, it's almost like that light bulb moment, like, wow, I actually have control over this, you know. They don't realize how much control they have over the thoughts that are going through their mind.
Understood. Monique, what you've touched on right now is, one of the ways in which you've assisted athletes. So what would you say are, some strategies for high performance? And I think in your experience, which are some of the strategies that you feel you've incorporated quite well and that has worked in certain cases for you?
Okay, so I actually utilize the whole idea of emotional intelligence as a huge foundation for how I move forward. It's such a basic principle, but so many people are unaware of these areas and how critical they are in your functioning as a human being, never mind as a high performance athlete, just as a person in general. Just the idea around self-awareness, self-regulation, empathy, all those kinds of things, social awareness. And particularly in my context of working in team sports, these ideas are so critical. So I've had to coach the boys through the idea of self-awareness. What does that look like? What does it mean for you? Being able to take responsibility for your stuff. If you're not picked for the team, throwing your toys out the cot and blaming everybody around you is not constructive behavior. Like being able to take the time to sit down with your coach and just ask the question, why wasn't I picked? Could I have a bit more context and understanding, to be able to then be given practical steps on where you need to improve and what you need to do? Then you have an idea of what you have to do to move forward and improve to be able to get a positive outcome afterwards. And so many of them think, can I do that? You know what I mean? Am I allowed to just go to the coach and ask? And I often tell them, listen, by taking the step and taking responsibility for your own improvements and moving forward and getting better, the coach is going to be impressed with you, because many athletes don't do that. And by you doing that alone is already going to plant a seed in the coach's mind and go, you know what, this athlete, there's something more to them. They have that motivation, they have that intention, and they are persevering through it. And so it speaks more to their character as well as their intention to improve. And then, of course, the social awareness side of things, constantly being aware of your teammates and helping them understand that building trust and a brotherhood in their team is absolutely critical. Because when you are on that field, I help them try to build a scenario of you're on a battlefield, and that you need to be willing to fall on your sword for the man next to you. And if you don't know who that person is, you're not going to be willing to do that. That's why so many athletes tend to be selfish in the game and make moves that elevate themselves, because they're not thinking about the team as a whole and the success of the team. And so many of them, once they realize this fact, they make an effort to really get to know their teammate members, not just on a surface level, but on a deep level. I mean, if any of you have ever watched the documentaries of the Springboks and Chasing the Sun and all that kind of stuff, you can literally feel that brotherhood. It's tangible in what you're watching, because they've built such an incredible friendship and love for each other. And that's what makes the difference. That creates that chemistry between them. And that chemistry is so critical when they are in that environment of pressure. So the emotional intelligence for me is absolutely critical. That's something I speak into a lot. Things like visualization as well. So when it comes to being able to visualize themselves in a certain space, they are able to get themselves into almost like a place where they can see themselves completing a task and succeeding in that. So say, for instance, if they are the kicker and they have to kick to the poles, being able to visualize that and see themselves doing it and getting it through the polls and noticing every single little sense that's taking place during that time, the smell, the sounds, what they can see, what they can hear, all of those things. Because if they can visualize the success of a particular event, then they can recreate that in the real setting. So not only when it comes to the game stage, but also when it comes to recovering from injury. So this is a large area that is a huge issue for so many athletes, is when they get injured, they can so easily fall into a space of depression and all that kind of stuff, because sometimes they just see their whole career falling to pieces because they don't know what the possible outcome might be. So being able to visualize themselves well again, to visualize their knee being better after an ACL surgery, etc. They need to be able to see that, because you can't get there if you're constantly thinking negatively about what the possible outcome might be.
Okay. And then Monique, I think something that you've touched on a bit is, working with the individual and then also that individual in a team. Do you feel there are certain strategies that work for teams and then work for individual sportsmen? So if you're in a sport where you're not working as a team, so maybe not cricket, rugby, soccer, but maybe golf or tennis players, where they're not working as a team, but in their individual capacity, things like that.
Yes, absolutely. So, I feel like in a team setting, you generally get a lot more support, because you're part of a body, you know what I mean? You're like the arm on the body, or the leg on the body. There's people around you all the time that are playing different roles and ticking different boxes. When you're playing an individual sport, it's you and you alone, so there's a lot more pressure on your shoulders. So it's being able to understand that, but also then you get an opportunity to get to the core of that particular person, understanding their real insecurities and the specific challenges that they're having. So you're able to dig a little bit deeper into the actual uniqueness of that individual, and be able to assist them through that. So when you're working in a team setting, and if I'm sitting with a whole squad, I'm kind of talking into a topic that blankets over all of them. I'm not necessarily getting to the core of this particular person or that particular person and understanding their unique context. So it does look very different when you are approaching a team versus an individual.
Thanks so much. So Monique, a little bit of a personal question that I'm sure all of us are interested in knowing. Where or at what point did you realize that you wanted to incorporate your passion for psychology and wellness and mental well-being with sport?
Well, it kind of just fell in my lap, actually. So, weirdly enough, I've grown up around rugby literally since day dot. I was born and raised on Kings Park rugby field. My father's been involved in rugby administration since before I was born. He was president of the KZN Rugby Union. He was part of the executive SARU board. So rugby's been involved in my life ever since I was tiny. And quite frankly, I would way rather be on a beach than next to a rugby field. So when the opportunity at the Sharks came up, I was like, okay, well, rugby isn't my jam, but I mean, let's give it a try. And to be very honest, I very, very quickly fell in love with it. Not just rugby itself, but just sport as a whole. I have a very, very sports orientated family. My brother was a representative referee. My other brother was a presenter on Super Sports. So my mom was a sports massage therapist. So I couldn't really get away from it. And I didn't have an option.
Inevitable.
yes. And I was probably the least sporty one out of them all. I kind of had no interest in it. But once I got into the industry, I just realized it was just such an untapped space. I almost felt like these athletes had been neglected in the way that they hadn't been considered in terms of the mental health and wellness side of things. There's so much emphasis and high performance on every single tiny thing to do with their body, like body fat percentages and measuring this and measuring that, and how many pull-ups can you do and how many push-ups can you do and all that kind of stuff. There was so much focus on the physical for so long that all the other stuff had been so neglected, and so that's why I decided to slowly but surely get into this side of things and start working with the boys. And I actually really, there was like an epiphany, and I was like, okay, I need to be making this more formal. So, I'd speak to the coaches and say, can we please have sessions? I would have sessions with the whole academy, which would be up to like 120 boys at a time, where I'd be in a room and I'd do presentations and help them understand, but we'd get very much into conversations where they could speak. And, when I could sit in a team setting, like say, I would have sessions with the junior contracted players. So that was more around like 30 boys. And I remember doing an exercise on vulnerability. That was one of the first sessions I did with them, because I knew it would probably be one of the hardest things to speak through. And I did an exercise with them where they had an opportunity to draw a picture that represented something that everyone knows about them, and a picture of something that no one knows about them, and they were going to share it amongst each other. Now, these are boys that are going to be competing in competitions and the Curry Cup, etc., together. So it was a good opportunity for them to start learning details about each other. And this was the first step into this whole vulnerability talk. And I was honestly blown away by how much these boys were willing to share. And now these boys had come from various schools from all over the country. So some of them didn't even really know each other that well. And they were just, there was tears, there was emotions, there was all sorts of stuff. And I realized that after that session, that so many of these boys had just connected in such a real way. And they had learned things like, I thought I was the only person who was struggling with growing up with an alcoholic father, when meanwhile there were another 4 boys with me that have experienced the exact same thing. And that helped them connect in a real heart way, and that created familiarity and an opportunity to speak into something that was common between them. And that built relationship, and that's where the brotherhood started. I just really noticed that was such an impactful experience. And so she's from there. I've just never really looked back, and every opportunity I get, I try work with more athletes. I mean, to be very honest, I would love to work with more females because I'm so passionate about women. But it's just, happened that I've ended up in spaces where with males, etc. But I'm so passionate about women, and I'm looking to work more with female athletes.
Okay. Well, if anybody on this session is in attendance and you are a female high-performance athlete or athlete in any sense, definitely reach out to Monique, especially if you're in the KZN area. Right, so we are going to head into the live Q&A. So Monique, just the first question is, does one have to be an active sports person in order to become a sports psychologist? And Nic,
Absolutely.
I think you can also maybe speak into this in your experience.
Absolutely not. I do think having some understanding of sports is pretty critical, though, because I think if you're someone who doesn't really understand sports or haven't been around sports people, it may be quite difficult. But anybody who gets into the space of counseling isn't always going to have experienced another person's experience. That's what empathy is, you know what I mean, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. But I do think understanding sport to the best of your ability and being around sports people and understanding how they work, observing their behavior, watching the sport, I think is also very important. So no, if you look at me, I was a synchronized swimmer. So I didn't do anything on high level sport whatsoever. Having said that, though, I was surrounded by sports since I was a tiny girl. So I had that frame of reference, and I do feel like I had a bit of an upper hand in that area. but yeah, you don't need to be an active sports person. I do think it's beneficial though, because you can understand the person a little bit better, but it's not a prerequisite whatsoever.
Thanks so much. I think, Nic, one of the things that Monique mentioned was that her journey to working in sports and becoming a high performance coach wasn't the usual pathway of doing it all the way to masters in psychology. So maybe in terms of this question, you could share a bit about your journey and your study pathway to becoming a sports psychologist.
Yeah, sure. And just apologies from my side to everyone for only joining now. My pathway, I'm a qualified psychologist in counseling, but before that, I worked as a sports mental performance coach for at least 5 or 6 years. So I think my pathway is similar to Monique's in that it's not the traditional way of doing it, because it's quite difficult in South Africa still to qualify in this field. I did a sports science degree, and then I did up until honors in my psychology. And from there, I started to work in what I like to call mental performance coaching, because obviously we couldn't call ourselves psychologists. But I definitely agree with Monique. You don't have to come from a sporting background. It does help to understand team environments or the high pressure environments, but some of the best sports psychologists out there do not come from a sports background across the world. So I definitely agree with Monique on that point.
Awesome. Thanks so much. We do have a very rugby specific question, Monique. From a rugby perspective, how closely would you or did you work with coaching staff, if any at all?
Well, this is actually a fantastic question. Thank you, Joshua. To be very honest, it can be tricky because a lot of the coaches, particularly at provincial level, are very set in their ways and, have a big idea of what they're doing and how they're doing it. But the great reality is a lot of the coaches coming through the system now are buying into this idea of the mental side of things a lot more, and they're a lot more open to it, and over time have realized that this is such a critical space. So working with the athletes themselves has been a great journey, but the coaches absolutely need a very similar opportunity to be able to share and work through their stuff and be able to learn how they can work with their athletes. Even something as simple as knowing the kind of personalities their athletes have and understanding some of their insecurities. And I always do encourage the coaches to have one-on-ones with all their players to get a gauge of what is their background, where they're from, what are they about, because that provides a lot of context to how they act, how they behave on the field, how they react when something doesn't go their way. All those kinds of things matter. And from a coach's perspective, you need to be able to be malleable with your players and be able to know, okay, I know that something's going on with this particular player, so I get that he's acting that way. Maybe I won't take it personally this time. You know what I mean? Because sometimes coaches, you can sometimes take a very, very hard stance against their players. I suppose you kind of have to in some way, but they also have to have that soft side. And I think it's important for them to know that and understand the value of understanding the humanness of their players. So I did have the privilege of working with some really incredible coaches and still to today. So yeah, I think the coaches are equally as important as the athletes. And if a coach can upskill themselves in this space, which I suppose, the short course that SACAP are going to be offering, it's absolutely critical. Adding that on to what they're currently doing would just put them in a whole nother realm in terms of understanding their players on a different level.
Thanks so much, Monique. Nic, speaking into that short course, we have a student at SACAP who is looking at offering a degree purely focused on sports psychology. So seeing as we don't offer a full degree, and as we've mentioned previously, the HPCSA does not have this as a recognized registration field, could you perhaps tell, I think, all our attendees what this short course will entail and how it will assist anybody, looking to maybe niche in sports psychology?
Sure, yeah. I think the thing I like about the course the most, and SACAP's kind of style in general, is the appliedness of it. So the course is very much practical in how to deal with real cases, how to implement real mental skills. It doesn't obviously cover anything that would lead to a degree or something. So we try to keep the theory in a minimum and the practicality in a maximum. So that if you get opportunities with young sports teams, with school teams, that you at least have some sort of knowledge, and also for coaches out there to have just the additional skill added to their arsenal of coaching skills. I do believe that in the future there will be a push towards getting a degree specifically in sports psychology, similar to the counseling degree, the honors equivalent degree. But that we can't determine the time yet. So for now, the best thing for people to do is to do courses like this SACAP short course and upskill yourself wherever you can. I know at least 3 or 4 companies in South Africa that offer short courses in sports psych, and then overseas, internationally, there's also quite a few courses that are available. And then on top of that, I think the practical experience is very important. So if you can find someone that will allow you some time, even if it's on a volunteer basis, just to have talk to teams and to get a feel for team environments, that also helps a lot.
Thank you. As a follow-up question to that, so one of our attendees would like to know, how does one find people who will give a chance to work closely or even get supervision assistance from people like yourself and Monique, especially since it seems that an individual is considered for gaining such an opportunity only once they've obtained a postgraduate degree?
Yeah, I think you've got to kind of take a leap and reach out. I'm quite open to letting people come and sit, or not supervised, to sit in my session and to learn from it. When I do online sessions, I allow people to join the room and just mute themselves and listen in. Obviously, that's if the team allows it and if confidentiality allows it. But generally, it's just something you've got to reach out to people. You've got to put yourself out there, take the risk, lose the fear of being told no, and someone will say yes. I know I definitely say yes. If you're in my area, then I let you come into my sessions, and if you are available online, then some of the online sessions I'll let you join as well. And then what I would suggest is to find local clubs and provincial teams like cricket. If you're in Western Province, for example, the Western Province youth teams, they have under 13 teams, under 16 teams, and they don't have the funding, but they're always open to having someone come in and chat to their players on a volunteer basis. So if you feel confident enough in your skills, to reach out to club coaches and provincial coaches to try and get some work experience there.
I absolutely agree with Nic in that respect. You know, there's so many sports teams, even schools, that would jump on an opportunity to have someone work with their players. And the reality is, you know, you're not necessarily dealing with pathology or anything at a high level. I mean, if you have even your postgrad in psychology, and you're working through some of these ideas like we've spoken through, emotional intelligence, visualization, all those kinds of things. If I can recommend to anybody here is read. Like, there's so much incredible information out there around these areas. And of course, this short course is amazing that you can pursue. But there's so much information that you can obtain that speaks into high performance and just the idea around sport and mental health and wellness and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, there are tons of opportunities if you just look for them. If you're just looking for time, hours, experience, exposure, even just exposing yourself to sports environments as much as possible, watching as much sports as you can, that's huge. I mean, if you're just, you know, say there's been a lot of questions about rugby, just watching rugby, and something as simple as not watching the game itself, watching things like body language. You know what I mean? Like, why did he react that way? You know, after a line out, when the hooker, you know, puts his head down and looks all sad, that's sending a message to the rest of the players. Like, being aware of that stuff. and knowing that that's a topic you can speak into with the players, helping them understand that you are constantly sending messages through your body language, and you need to be aware of that. So if you're feeling a certain way, you need to know, like, what message am I sending? I need to be sending a message of confidence and constantly in the game to make sure that I'm not showing any weakness to the opponent. So, you know, those kinds of things are critical. And when you really look deeper, there's so much to see. So just observation, reading, all that kind of stuff. There's so much upskilling you can do just in your own capacity.
Thanks so much. I think we have a couple more questions and a little bit of time. So if I could just ask, I know we've touched on this already, but maybe if each of you can just line it out for us. Jessica says being accepted into a master's course in psychology is incredibly difficult in South Africa, which we know. So without a master's in psychology, how else can one become equipped and get into the field of sports psychology? What would you advise? So Jessica, I think it's difficult to advise as everybody's journey is different, but Monique and Nic, if you could just maybe share once again your journey to being in the space that you're in, and you know, attendees can sort of figure their way around how best to get into sports psychology or high performance coaching, you know, in whichever niche or situation they are in. Sure.
I'll go first. Okay. Okay, so I honestly think if you have a grounding in psychology, so an undergrad and even postgrad honors, I do recommend that possibly pursuing a postgrad diploma in coaching is an excellent extra you can add on, because there's so many facets of the coaching realm that fits so perfectly into the sports side of things, just in terms of the methodology and all of that kind of stuff. So I think it's a great complement to a background in psychology if you're wanting to go into sport. But once again, the sports element isn't something that's specific in those studies and those modules and those courses. So once again, these little add-ons like the short courses or where you are able to upskill yourself in a very sports specific way is going to have to be something you have to find as an add-on and extra. But I do think the area of coaching is also a really helpful space to go into, also because if you get the postgrad diploma in coaching, particularly through SACAP, you'll be ICF registered, which is also a great thing to have. And that's international, which is a great opportunity if you're wanting to go work elsewhere out of the country. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. But once again, exposing yourself to the sports space.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, if you consider the formal options, then a psychology degree is the honors, and then perhaps the counseling, the BPsych equivalent. With a sports science degree, sometimes helps in the coaching space and to understand the full dynamic of sport, from the physiology to the coaching, the nutrition, and everything. And then you could also go all the short course routes where you're doing short courses wherever you can with practical experience. There are a couple of associations you can register with, as Monique's referred to now, and then some of the other ones are the International Mental Games Coaches Association, which is an international one. It's based in America, but they are open to international registration. And then there is an Applied Sports Psychologist registration, which is also based in the States. That one's a little bit harder to get in. You've got to have some sort of formal qualification and a whole lot of working hours. But those things provide you with the needed backing and credibility that you won't be getting from the HPCSA. So I think that type of registration helps with credibility to get into the field. And then the education, as Monique alluded to earlier, is mostly available to you freely online in terms of the practicality of the skills. But if you do want to go the formal route, then as with any psychology registration, you've got to hope for the best, because getting into that master's degree is more hope than anything else. It's kind of luck of the draw. But until you get in, then the more education you do, the better. And I've actually seen some of the questions. I've read one of them. I know the one participant here, and he's an excellent sports person who's been playing varsity sports for a long time, and has just got into his master's. I think he's just finishing his counselling master's and trying to enter the sports world. And I think he's 28, 29 years old. So it's definitely an option for you. And if you do get that, if you are lucky enough to get selected, then good on you. Don't give up trying on that. But if you're struggling with that, then there are some other avenues that you can choose.
Thanks so much for sharing. Yes, I see we've got quite a few sports people and students over here. And someone's also actually left a comment in the chat box saying that they had done the postgraduate diploma in coaching at SACAP and they would recommend it. So thanks, Monique, and thanks, Nic, for obviously sharing those options for our attendees. So for Monique and Nic, I think in your own experiences, someone's asked, have you worked with individuals with debilitating mental illnesses that impact their performance as well as the teams? How does one work with someone who struggles with mental health illnesses, and how do you move forward with them? I think obviously there's little nuances that you can share, but if you have had this experience, would you mind sharing just a little bit about that experience with our attendees, please?
Sure, I'll go first. Yes, I've definitely had an instance like this. And of course, in my position, I've known to refer. So where I have picked up a problem, whether it be depression, anxiety, I've even had a scenario with schizophrenia, I've referred on to a psychiatrist and gotten them the necessary help that they need. And of course, once it's referred, then it's taken care of by that particular professional. And, in almost all cases, they've gone onto the necessary medication and helping them to, make sure they're taking that medication. And then just kind of checking in with them to making sure that they're okay. And seeing the difference has been quite substantial, just in terms of when they realize that once they've gotten that help and they are now getting the help that they need in terms of the meds and assisting with that particular disorder, what a difference it makes in their life, their well-being, their performance, everything. I've even had coaches, notice a chalk and cheese difference between the athletes. But the key is, a lot of these athletes I've dealt with were young, and, trying to get a young person to stay on regular medication can be quite tricky sometimes. So that, there's also those challenges. And then there's also the idea around cultural background and understanding diversity and, what does this mean? So I had some instances with some of the boys where they were afraid to approach the idea of it, to let their family know that they'd been diagnosed with a mental disorder. So it's also trying to navigate those challenges as well. But yeah, in cases like that, it's absolutely you refer it to the necessary professional who can deal with it in the correct manner.
Yes, I think I second that, and it's very important for you to understand your role and your boundaries within that role. So instead of trying to kind of deal with that in the sporting space by yourself, to refer is the better option. I've had less severe cases than Monique mentioned now, but a lot of depression cases. A couple of athletes that are close to retirement or heading into retirement. We actually started a program called LAS, Life After Sport, just to help rugby players, cricket players through that time and process to find opportunities outside of their sport. So that's probably been the most severe cases I've dealt with. However, with what Monique said, if something severe has come up, then it's direct referral and kind of stay within the scope of sport, rather than trying to combine clinical work with sport work.
Nic and Monique, we are so grateful to have you on the session with us. And we do hope that the information all our attendees have received here today will help forge your way to, niching and doing what you are most passionate about in your field of interest. Thank you once again for joining us, to our attendees as well as our panelists. And we hope you have a lovely afternoon further. Take care.